In the previous videos, you've seen the games that had huge success in the market, the technology that drove those games, and even the people who used those games to find their own success. In a span of a decade, the people behind id Software changed the gaming world. On top of that, John Carmack releases the source code to the games every time he releases a shiny new engine. As a gaming community, we have full access to the software that changed the industry. So rather than looking at what id Software accomplished in this video, let's take a look at what we accomplished over the years. The game engines running the id Software games were the key to their success. The simple, slim, highly optimized code is what gives you that adrenaline rush of killing Nazis and demons. Suffice to say, other companies wanted to cash in on this as well. Some of them built their own engine from scratch, but others bought a license to use Carmack's tech for their own games. Their most licensed engine was the one used in Quake 3 Arena. This was used in games like Soldier of Fortune 2 and Star Wars Jedi Knight by Raven Software. Most notably, the engine was licensed by the startup company Infinity Ward for use in their very first game, Call of Duty. Of course, their other engines were licensed by a handful of companies to produce some rather interesting games. Chex Quest was a first-person shooter used to promote Chex cereal. Imagine that, getting a free game in a box of cereal? Let alone a Doom clone. This game won a couple awards for its effectiveness in advertising. id Software would even work with Raven Software to bring forth the fantasy games Heretic and Hexen, with Hexen being the title to partially bring to life John Romero's original idea for Quake. For many companies, licensing an engine is much easier than creating your own. Using an existing engine means you can hire people with prior experience with it, and you can push a game to the market much quicker. You just need to pay up. Depending on the engine, you can expect to pay $250,000 plus 5% royalties. All negotiable, of course, but for the lowly modder who can't pay a single dime, this is out of reach. But John Carmack is an open source advocate. Every time he creates a new engine, he releases the source code for the previous one. The source code is released under the GNU General Purpose License, giving the fans more than enough freedom for their own purposes. They made improvements to the engines that ran the games by taking advantage of the features on modern hardware and operating systems, yet they maintained the same classic gameplay that made them popular in the first place. Following the creation of these source ports, these sprites and low-resolution textures really began to show their age. In response to this, the community began to work on what are generally referred to as high-resolution packs. Particularly with the earlier games, the normally pixelated textures and sprites were replaced with high-resolution textures and 3D models. So in the end, you can have high-resolution graphics, high-fidelity surround sound, and vastly superior controls. Aside from the huge improvements to these games, several mods from them were converted to their own standalone versions. Digital Paint 2, for example, no longer requires you to have Quake 2 installed to play. It also incorporates a global login system to allow players to protect their names in clan tags across all servers. Players not registered as members of a particular clan in the system cannot use that clan's tag. Best of all, Digital Paint 2 is free, along with many other now standalone mods. It's not only the engines and mods that got the open source treatment, but a lot of entirely new projects have sprung up. Castle Totenkopf is a standalone mod that runs under the Wolf 4 SDL port. You start in a prison with a pistol, as with Wolfenstein 3D, but the similarities diverge from here onward. You can dual wield certain weapons, and you have a lot more variety in what is available to you. You have Walther P-38s, MP-40s, Kar-98s, MG-42s, flamethrowers, Panzerschrecks, and other really big German weapons. You can pick up some body armor to reduce incoming damage, and in some levels, you'll have a chance to use a scoped weapon to pick apart the enemy ranks. All the enemies carry around the new weapons, so their difficulty will vary depending on the situation. I really like the high quality voiceovers. They're speaking full German sentences instead of the one or two generic words they usually say. The guns sound loud and powerful, and you can hear and see bullets ricocheting off the walls. The music manages to create a warlike urgency to completing the game. The audio is probably the best part of this mod, but this also has highly detailed textures on the walls and floors, while at the same time maintaining a degree of pixelation to keep that classical look and feel of the game. The graphics are still high up there as well. One complaint I do have is that the controls are still just as limited as they were in 1992. You cannot set a key to strafe left or strafe right, so you have to be extra careful when peeking around corners. Aside from that minor gripe, Castle Totenkopf looks and feels as authentic as you can get with the Wolfenstein 3D engine, and it's extremely well done overall. Put this on your list of games to play. Megaman 8-Bit Deathmatch is one of those projects where the creators take characters from one gaming universe and places them on a completely different playing field. This runs under the Skulltag engine, replacing all the Doom Marines and monsters with Robot Masters from the Megaman series. This is a deathmatch-only mod, though it does have a single-player component where you fight against computer-controlled bots. Every Robot Master from Mega Man 1 through 6 is playable, as well as many other characters from the Mega Man series, but none of their strengths and weaknesses are in effect. For example, if you use the Bubble Lead on Heatman, or the Shadow Blades on Sparkman, they will not take extra damage. This is one of the things I feel should have been implemented in this game, but then again, this would have made the weapon balance and placement in the level design much more difficult. Speaking of that, you may have trouble navigating some of these levels because the NES-style graphics make it difficult to find paths into different areas, but at the same time, I do like how the levels try to replicate the look and feel of the original NES games. Even the sound and music come ripped straight from them to complete the package. Overall, Mega Man 8-Bit Deathmatch is just a little too gimmicky for my tastes. The basis of these weapons were centered around a single-player 2D side-scroller that you take from Robot Masters. The transition to a multiplayer first-person shooter would require too much of an overhaul to make them less gimmicky. Nonetheless, it is somewhat of an interesting game for Mega Man fans. Just don't be too surprised if it doesn't hold your attention for long. One of the more notable source ports is for, surprisingly enough, a console game. Doom 64 was supposed to be an original IP with new weapons and monsters, but the game was changed to Doom during its development cycle for brand recognition. In the end, this game served as more of a sequel for the series, rather than a generic console port, so this version was remade by fans using the source code. All you need is the source port, and a ROM of the original Nintendo 64 cartridge to run this. Let's talk about the actual game first. This follows the same gameplay formula as in the other Doom games, but offers fresh new content to give a completely different look and feel to the game. Doom 64 offers a true 3D environment to explore, with over 30 new levels to play through, and all the weapons, items, and monsters have updated graphics to go along with it. The sound effects are the same ones used in the PlayStation versions of Doom, and the music is more of an ambient soundtrack, so this mixes in a spooky atmosphere on top of the proven awesome gameplay of the original Doom. As for the source port itself, the first thing you notice is the massive improvement to the graphics. There's no contest when you compare modern video cards to the capabilities of a Nintendo 64, but you can appreciate the improvements they have on the game. The colors are richer and the textures are much sharper than the original. The graphics are just cleaner overall. The controls are also much better since you're moving with a mouse and keyboard setup. You can perform quick turns and sidesteps with ease. But keep in mind, the difficulty of this game revolved around the Nintendo 64 controls, so you have to turn up the difficulty if you want a similar challenge. On top of this, the port also features mod support to allow anyone to create custom levels, textures, and sprites. so if you have not played this game yet, whether through the source port or on the actual console, you should check this game out. Now for something a little more experimental. Feast your eyes on Arcade Quake. This runs under the Dark Places engine and turns the first-person shooter we all know and love into a 3D side-scroller. This was first unveiled at the 2008 Quake Expo, but unfortunately, the demo is the only public release of this. The only fully playable level is the Slipgate Halflex, which is a side-scrolling representation of the first level of Quake. Many of the familiar weapons and monsters are here, but the difficulty takes on an interesting dynamic since you can no longer sidestep. You have to jump over enemies and their projectiles to avoid them. Many of the buttons on the walls have to be manually pressed with the use key. While there are still some doors and elevators automatically used when you move near them, some of these things in the environment adds another layer of interaction to the game. You can also toggle an aiming reticule to shoot boxes and walls in the background. Some of these will reveal hidden items and secret areas, so I like how you're encouraged to search for these things. Even with the minuscule amount of content available, Arcade Quake is really fun. It does have the 4 difficulty levels, but again, there's only one playable level in this demo. There is a sandbox level for testing purposes, and they do have a couple deathmatch maps which doesn't seem to be playable. They did, however, release a deathmatch trailer, which looks really awesome. I'm disappointed that this project hasn't been updated for so long. The deathmatch looks really fun to play, and I can see so much potential for a single-player campaign. I would have liked to see more work done on this. Unfortunately, this is the fate that many of these projects hold. The mods you saw were just a handful of cherry-picked projects downloaded from the internet. There's literally thousands of them made by just regular people, gamers like myself, and many others who just enjoy making things. It's a really good feeling to have when people are enjoying your work. But the biggest reward from modding is the experience. That is, work experience. Keep in mind that the work you do when creating a mod is the same kind of work that professional game developers do to create the AAA titles you see everywhere. So what better way to get a job as a game developer than to build your portfolio with the work you've done? 3-Wave Software created the Capture the Flag mod for the original Quake. Because of the mod's success, the company went on to do contract work for other companies, such as creating the multiplayer modes for Army of Two and Ghostbusters. Tim Willits is the creative director at id Software, who joined the company in 1995. He got his start by making custom Doom levels in his spare time. He was also one of the people under contract to work on the master levels for Doom 2. This led to a full-time job at Rogue Entertainment to work on Strife, and ultimately a position at id Software for the development of Quake. Ben Morris created the Worldcraft editor for the Quake games, and it's the one I have the most experience with. This initially supported the original Quake, later supporting Quake 2 and Half-Life. He was eventually hired by Valve for his work, and Worldcraft became the Hammer editor for use with Half-Life 2 and other Source Engine games. Min Lei first broke out when he created the Navy SEALs mod for Quake. He also worked on Action Quake 2, followed by the Counter-Strike mod for Half-Life. Eventually, Valve picked him up, along with the rights to the Counter-Strike name. As a side note, Valve is notorious for giving jobs to those who contributed to the modding community in a big way. As mentioned previously, Min Lei and Ben Morris were brought on for their work. At the bare minimum, modding has allowed you to take on a game developer's persona, albeit on a smaller scale. In many cases, you don't have access to the underlying engine, but you can change many aspects of the game if it's designed for it, or through a number of hacks if it's not. This was the case with the id Software games, hex editing with Commander Keen and Wolfenstein 3D, WAD files with Doom and Doom 2, and Quake C and custom tools for the Quake games. Now that we have access to the source code, we can take these mods even further and also bring these games and the memories we have of them with us into the future.